Alright, today's focus is on how to use your fingers to generate power within your pushing game. First, let's discuss the properties of different rubbers. The characteristics of a grippy, non-tacky rubber are a soft sponge, a smooth surface, and high elasticity. A tacky rubber is characterized by a harder sponge, a sticky surface, and the ability to bite the ball well. Therefore, grippy rubbers are suitable for defensive play, like blocking your opponent's loops, and also for flat hits and smashes. This is because the sponge has great deformation, allowing it to absorb the ball's energy and then propel it out. For smashes, you need the ball to come off the racket quickly. The speed of a ball hit with a tacky rubber versus a grippy rubber feels distinctly different. So, what are tacky rubbers good for? Friction. For any friction-based strokes like lifting backspin, banana flicks, serves, and pushes, a tacky rubber is the ideal choice. Some of you ask, why does my backhand push with a grippy rubber always go long or pop up? It's because grippy rubbers have less surface friction, which puts a higher demand on your touch and skill. A professional player can push effectively with either tacky or grippy rubbers, but this is challenging for amateurs. With a grippy rubber, if you make too much flat contact or lack that sharp snap in your hand, the ball will go long or into the net. That's the fundamental difference between tacky and grippy rubbers. My recommendation is this: you must use a tacky rubber on your forehand. Using a grippy rubber on your forehand is, frankly, a shortcut that hinders your development. You might feel the shot is good, but in reality, it lacks any significant spin. The spin is too weak, whether on your serves or your loops. Furthermore, shots from a grippy rubber travel in a very straight line, and the second bounce doesn't kick or die. Many players use a grippy forehand because it feels soft and springy, giving a false sense of power. The ball flies off before you can even complete your stroke. When an opponent serves with heavy spin, you're vulnerable because a delay of even 0.01 seconds in applying friction will cause an error. It's only good for flat hitting and blocking, not for generating friction. A tacky rubber with a dense sponge is harder and deforms less, allowing you to execute your full stroke and use your technique to control the spin, arc, and power. A grippy rubber lets you borrow the opponent's power, so you can return the ball without using much force. Because your backhand uses a grippy rubber, you must use a sharp, explosive snap when returning a spinny serve. Without that instantaneous snap when receiving serve with a grippy rubber, you will pop the ball up, hit the net, or send it long. So, my advice is to use a tacky rubber on your forehand. For your backhand, use a semi-tacky rubber. Even a slightly tacky surface changes how the rubber bites the ball. This completely changes your ability to handle incoming spin. That's my recommendation. Now, let's get into the push technique, starting with the backhand. The first key point is your wrist action. To execute a controlled backhand push, your wrist should be cocked down, like a chicken's claw. Watch professionals on TV, they don't push with a flat wrist, they drop the wrist to push the ball. So, the first thing you must do when pushing is to drop your wrist. This is the only way you can control the ball's trajectory. Otherwise, you're just scooping the ball from underneath. Scooping makes the ball pop up. By dropping your wrist, you can cut down on the ball from a higher point, which creates the proper angle and arc for friction. This applies to both penhold and shakehand grips. Drop the wrist like a chicken's claw to push. That's point 1. Point 2 is how to use your fingers for power. To add more spin to your push, you must focus on creating the most compact and brief friction possible. For a backhand push, where do I apply finger pressure? At the tip of the racket. How do you use the tip? You aim with it and keep your backswing very short and close to the ball. Moreover, the push is a classic stroke that relies on late acceleration. In reality, my push is a very small, concise movement. The shorter and more compact the friction, the more you need to pinch the racket. You will feel this very clearly in your thumb and index finger. You can't create friction by wiggling your wrist, that will just make the ball fly off. The wrist must be stable. For both penhold and shakehand, I can guarantee that the power comes from the thumb and index finger. Essentially, at the exact moment of contact, these two fingers apply downward pressure. Building on that very brief downward motion, there needs to be a distinct pinch of the racket. To clarify, gripping the racket involves all fingers suddenly tightening. while pinching is specifically when two fingers press together. We are talking about pinching the racket with two fingers. When I push with a penhold grip, there must be a sudden pinch of the racket exactly upon contact. The two fingers need to squeeze firmly. This squeeze should be very pronounced. For penholders, before contact, your fingers are slightly relaxed and away from the blade. But at the moment of impact, both fingers must press downward together. As you press down, the penhold thumb becomes crucial, it must push down on the blade. It's a small motion. Use the tip of your racket for the backhand push. Finally, your two fingers squeeze the racket. In the penhold system, your thumb must press down to accelerate the racket head, giving you the fastest and most solid contact. After pushing down, your index finger and thumb must instantly grip the racket tightly. This aggressive pushing technique only works against balls with weak spin. Don't use it against a heavy backspin serve. If you push a heavy backspin ball this way, you'll just be eating the spin yourself. If the opponent serves a half-long, light spin ball, you can use this technique. But against a heavy backspin, you can't use this method, because this is a technique for actively adding your own spin. The feeling is this: your fingers start relaxed, then your thumb presses down, and simultaneously, your index finger and thumb squeeze the blade. Now, let's move on to the shakehand grip. For a shakehand backhand push, you can't hold the racket too loosely. Any wobble in the racket face will send the ball out. So, for my backhand push, I lock the racket into the web of my hand. This is slightly different from the forehand grip. The second key is your index finger. If it's in the wrong position, your backhand push will pop up. Your index finger must be placed on the lower half of the racket face. I keep my index finger almost straight. A penholder can press down with the thumb, which naturally makes the racket head whip out forward, downward, and to the right. For a shakehand grip, pressing straight down won't create that whip. Your fingers must apply pressure to the right. This is how you use the tip of the racket to add spin. Watch closely, I am generating force downwards and to the right, not straight forward. Pushing straight forward and down is a very basic technique, suitable for beginners. If you want to produce an awkward, fast, and skidding push, you need to have more advanced hand skills. During a normal push, I use the very end of the racket head's motion to generate spin. When that tip comes down, the ball's trajectory stays low. This also makes my push faster, as if I'm adding a second burst of acceleration. My training partners say my push is exceptionally spinny, even compared to national champions they've played. I believe this is because my finger-generated power is very effective. Remember, the push is the most compact friction-based skill in table tennis. Therefore, right after generating power, your fingers must squeeze into the rubber. You have to feel your fingers pressing into the rubber, a sensation of pinching the blade. Why? Because the push is executed very close to the table. In this short distance, you must squeeze the racket to generate controlled power. Squeezing the racket helps you rein in the power, keeping the arc and pace under control. This is the key to the shakehand push. Let me explain the end of the motion. I see the backhand push as a two-part action. This isn't a standard textbook technique, but see if it works for you. Normally, a push should be one continuous motion, from back to front and down. However, to maximize quality and ensure the ball stays on the table, I've broken my backhand push into two phases. The first phase is a motion from up to forward and down. The second phase is a motion down and to the right. My push is the result of these two combined motions. You can think of it as half a forward push and half a side swipe. Because I use the end of my motion for the final friction, the ball's trajectory will not go high. If I'm worried about the opponent's spin, I can add that sideswipe motion at the end to press the ball's arc down, preventing it from going long. When I push this way, as long as my finger action at the end is sharp, the second bounce on the opponent's side will be very fast. This acts as a small, late acceleration. If you try to accelerate from the very beginning of your backswing, you are very likely to push the ball long. That's why in my first phase, I focus on holding the ball. Then, in the second phase, I accelerate. Many of you pop up your forehand push. Let me tell you why. A penholder can switch from a backhand to forehand push without changing the blade face. A shakehand player cannot, we must rotate the blade face. Your errors come from not rotating it correctly. When you move to the forehand side, your racket face is often too open. As for hitting the net, it's because the ball is too short and you don't get to it fast enough. So you end up contacting it at the very end of your stroke. When you contact the ball at the end of your stroke, you have no forward momentum. So of course it goes into the net. It's just a tap. Very few players can serve both short and extremely spinny to the forehand. So for a basic push, shouldn't your racket angle be more vertical? You might feel that it is, but to a coach's eye, your racket is still too open. So, make this adjustment. Point the inside of your wrist forward. Right now, the inside of your wrist is pointing up, which is why your push goes high. Your wrist angle is fixed. If the inside of your wrist points forward, your racket face will naturally be vertical. If it points up, your racket face will be flat. You can't change that relationship. The second point is the stroke itself. Most amateur players, when pushing cross-court, move their wrist but not their forearm. When you push like this, with only the wrist, there's no forward drive. The ball just goes sideways and into the net. This has less to do with finger pressure. Your errors are because you are only using your wrist. For a proper forehand push, the wrist doesn't rotate independently. Instead, the fingers create a sharp, dotting contact to apply force. Building on that sharp contact, the main driving force comes from your forearm. Watch closely. Is my wrist moving? It's actually the forearm moving downward. This is a forearm-driven action. The wrist itself has almost no independent wobble or movement. As the forearm moves down, that's when the fingers come into play. For a penhold forehand push, the power naturally comes from the index and middle fingers, as they are best positioned to apply force. Using your fingers simply means using the fingers that are in the best position to generate power for a given stroke. So when you push, as your forearm moves down, your back three fingers and thumb apply a sharp, downward tap at the exact moment the ball hits the racket. It's that brief. The rest of the power comes from the forearm. The backhand is the same. Friction is created in one concentrated moment. You cannot generate good friction with a long, drawn-out brushing motion. A sharp tap from the fingers at contact is all you need. It is not a continuous brushing stroke. Now for the shakehand grip. For the shakehand grip, the power is a relationship between your index finger and your thumb. At the moment of friction, the downward press from these fingers is very distinct and sharp. Look, my racket face is still. When I want to apply spin, I use my fingers. See? I am generating the action with my fingers. It's all about the force from the thumb and index finger at that single moment of contact. With that burst of finger power, I can control the ball. It's simply a very short acceleration from the fingers at the moment of contact. Remember, the push should be a sharp, short contact stroke. The problem many players have with friction is that their motion is too slow. It's too slow and the motion is too big. Friction is brief and accelerative, not slow and expansive. You won't get any spin with a slow motion. This applies to your serve as well. A slow friction motion is weak and easy for your opponent to attack. It must be brief and explosive.